Cozy Corner of Cinema. This is episode number 208, being recorded on Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. The coffee is moderately hot. The water is pretty cold. So let's get started. Let's talk about some films. So this was an idea that I've been kind of kicking around for a little bit now. I was listening to, I guess, the now famous episode of the Bret Easton Ellis podcast featuring Quentin Tarantino, where he had talked about his 20 favorite films of the century up to that point. And it had me thinking about films from the century that really have stuck with me, really have stayed with me. And I wanted to kind of keep the same guidelines and the same parameters that Tarantino had. So in this case, only one film per director. So only one Paul Thomas Anderson, only one Martin Scorsese, only one Christopher Nolan, etc. Just so it's not bogged down and you don't have 5 films by one director and 5 films by another, or at least an exorbitant amount. And number 2, I did not really do much research at all into putting together a list. I did a little bit, and I think what's most important to me, the films here, these are the ones that I really didn't have to think about. These are the ones that just came to me, and I may have only seen once or twice or whatever, how many times, but left an impact on me. So I didn't want to just go through and look at, any kind of list or any sort of... I did poke a little bit on my letterbox because I just wanted to double check to make sure there wasn't a glaring omission. And I suppose I could have done it without looking at all, but there were 2 titles in particular that had just left my mind, that I think would have been really unfortunate to have left out. And in terms of recent films, I tried not to go for super, super recent films. I think a lot of these films needed to sit with me and needed to stay where they are. The most recent film I have, I believe, is from 2022, or maybe it was 23, I don't know, which even then was pushing it a little bit. Yeah, 22. Because I think of recent films of the last few years. I think of, how much I've talked about Brady Corbet's The Brutalist, and how fond I am of that film, and how much of an impact that had on me when I watched it. I've seen it twice now, and I think it's just one of the great contemporary films. But it's very recent. It came out... I saw it last year at the time of this recording, so I saw it in January of 2025. So, as well, one that I was sort of going back and forth as to if I wanted to include it, which was even more recent, which is also listed as 2024, but I saw this in May of 2025. And that's Andrew DeYoung's Friendship with Tim Robinson and Paul Rudd, and that's a film that I've just been infatuated with. I think that's just one of the most enjoyable film experiences I've had for contemporary films in a long time. I think it's the funniest film in well over a decade, and it's a film I've seen more than any other recent film. So if you really wanted to, I suppose you could put an asterisk on Friendship and say that could be 21. I'm more so giving it the benefit of the doubt and putting that, not including that on the list, just for the fact that it's been out less than a year. And I'm choosing some of these films that are going from 2000 to 2026. But I guess in that case it would be 2022. So... And another thing, I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but I intentionally did not rewatch any of these films. There was one that I did end up rewatching, not solely for this list. I can explain it when I get to it, but it wasn't for this list. It was for wanting to show somebody. But I think this is probably a fair look at my taste. There is a myriad amounts of genres here, and I think they all kind of line up to a certain extent of maybe the sort of the kind of films that really kind of stick with me, more so than just choosing something that has been overwhelmingly critically appraised or acclaimed, I should say, or people talk about the best films of the 21st century, or their favorites, I should say, and many of those are ones that I like, but are not favorites. Even when you look at the best pictures, the best picture winners, there's almost nothing this Sanctuary that I would call a all-time favorite, or I would call a favorite. But let me just double check, and you could say, well, we have all these films to go to. You got to get to it, but this is going to be a course over a couple episodes, and it may not even be consecutive. They could easily be broken up, which may be the case because this is just one that has been kind of kicking around, and I wanted to use the opportunity. So let's see. I'm trying to look here. Okay. Gladiator, A Beautiful Mind, Chicago, Return of the King, $1 Million Baby, Crash, The Departed, No Country for Old Men, Slumdog Millionaire, Hurt Locker, The King's Speech, The Artist, Argo, 12 Years a Slave, Birdman, Spotlight, Moonlight, The Shape of Water, Green Book, Parasite, Nomadland, Coda, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Oppenheimer, and Anora. Oh, and One Battle After Another. Boy, has the Sanctuary been this poor for Best Picture winners? That is crazy. There's some real duds in there. But I digress. So this will be in completely alphabetical order. And if I get to only a couple, great. If I get to more than that, then we'll take it from there. So these are my 20 favorite films of the 21st century so far. So we're going to the year 2010, directed by Danny Boyle, is 127 Hours. This is based off of the true story, based off the book. Actually, was it a book or was it not? I don't know. The true life story of climber Aaron Ralston, who lives independently. He lives by his own sort of fruition where at the drop of a hat, he will go off and not tell anybody where he's going. And he finds himself literally trapped between a rock and a hard place. He is climbing down this crevice. A boulder falls on his rock, and he is now stranded there with no help coming at all. This film, you know what? Actually, one thing I want to put here, because I'm actually kind of curious about some of the Oscar nominations for certain years. So this, I know, lost to The King's Speech in 2010. This was, I'm going to actually contradict myself and not do that, because that's a rabbit hole that is going to be very easy to fall down into. But yeah, 127 Hours. This is one that I've seen this film about 5 or 6 times now. I think it is probably my favorite Danny Boyle film, which is really saying something, because I think he has a couple of really, really exceptional films under his belt, including Trainspotting, Shallow Grave, which maybe isn't on par with Trainspotting. I think it's good. Even Slumdog Millionaire, I think, is very good. And recently, 28 Years Later, which I thought was terrific. But I think 127 Hours is his strongest output. And a big part of that is the fever dream aspect of it. It is a film that, surprisingly enough, does not fall in, no pun intended, does not fall into many of the cliches that a single person led film falls into. Sometimes there are some films where you have a person who is leading the film by themselves, or it's a very limited cast, I should say. Maybe you have one person, 2 people, all that, and they almost feel a need to exposit to the audience. It's sort of like we have to tell you what this character is feeling. And because this is a true story, and because the real Aaron Ralston was documenting a lot of his journey on this video camera, it allows us to get into the head of his character. And I say this character, but it's a person. So if it turns into that, then just deal with it, or just go with it, I should say. Not deal. That sounds passive aggressive. But we're able to get a good sense of him, not only through these video diary entries, but the film, the way that Danny Boyle directs it, we get into these fever dream sequences where we start to get into Aaron Ralston's past and really this almost turning of the universe that led him to this moment. There's this one terrific sequence in the film where he talks about, where, we're constantly flashing back to him, and he's talking about almost like him and this boulder were meant to collide in all of the history of the universe, in all of the parts of the world, no matter what terrain or highway or force, anything like that. It's almost like they were meant to be. And an incredible performance by James Franco. I think James Franco, he's a very interesting actor. And this is the first time I think I was really kind of taken aback by how strong of an actor he is. He's an actor who does a lot of different, almost kind of performance type, almost like, willingly putting himself out there to do these different kinds of strange, kind of unique roles. And here, it is a great showcase of what he can do as an actor, how much emotion he can bring just by himself, because the film is entirely dependent on him. And as I say that, and I also talk about the feverish, fever dream, nightmare almost sequences when we look into his past. It's one of the few films I think I've ever seen that was able to properly convey what it feels like to be in a dream. And just how emotional that is. Which is another thing. This is a very, very emotional film, but it's never melodramatic. I think early on, it is playing it up fairly big, when he meets Kate Mara's character and he meets Amber. Is it Amber Tamblyn? I forgot that actress's name. He's playing it very big. He's playing it very exaggerated in a way where the first time I saw this, I was almost kind of turned off by that part of it because he was almost playing it too big. And in retrospect, seeing how big he gets and then the slow willowing down of him as the film goes on, the desperation, and we just see these long sequences, even without dialogue, where we just see the amalgamations in his mind start to, the gears of his mind start to go of what he is trying to do, where he realizes, okay, I have X amount of water, I have X amount of food, it's going to get freezing out at night. What really got me, though, and I apologize, it's going to be a lot of rambling. I have no notes, because I intentionally did not take any notes for any of what I'm talking about. This is truly just a spring of the mind sort of dialogue that I'm having here. But when we get into the regrets that he has about his past lovers, about his family, small role from Clemency Posey. Is it Posey? Yeah, Poesy, who's actually going to pop up in another film on the list. There are just these moments between them, whether it being intimate with each other in the back of a van, or they're at a big basketball game and we don't need to have the whole scene explained for us. We just know that she has got her heart broken by him. And it's that moment that he realizes the damage that he's caused other people. Not even just in any sort of immediate way where, you wrong somebody or you say the wrong thing. But in a case where, you're going out there, you're going to this place by yourself, feeling that you don't need anybody, feeling like you can take on the world by yourself, and coming to the realization that that the world is not such a lonely place, even in this situation. Like I said before, it's an incredibly emotional film. When we get to these sequences with him and actually, funnily enough, Treat Williams is in the film in a couple parts where we see Aaron as a kid and he's going out with his father and the early morning, sunrise coming up. And the moments between him and his father in their living room, where he is just watching his young sister play the piano, and he's coming to terms and realizing sort of what kind of son he was, what kind of brother he was, and this realization of just, you may never get to right these wrongs. If this really is going to be the end, then what does that mean for the life that you left behind? And another thing I really want to mention here is the score by A.R. Rahman. And the score for this film is amazing. I think one of the strongest sequences where the score kicks in is that scene I'm talking about before, when we flash back to Aaron as a kid with his father, Treat Williams, And if you've seen the film or remember the scene, it's when his dad wakes him up to see the sunrise, and there's this beautiful, beautiful acoustic guitar playing, and I just hear it in my head, and just even hearing it just gets me so emotional. It feels very nostalgic in a way. You know, this is one that, I mean, just, I mean, certain art you just relate to your own life, and I'm watching this film, and I've not been in this situation, thankfully, where I am stranded by myself. When I say this situation, I mean literally, like I'm trapped, you know, in the. But it's one of these things where as I'm watching the film, it lets me reflect on my own life, and how we treat other people. One of the things I was mentioning before, in terms of the dream sequences, or in terms of these nightmare kind of sequences, is that there's this great moment when he's having this sequence when he is trying to he's overwhelmed with emotion, and he's trying to talk to somebody, and like in a dream, he's talking and talking when the words aren't coming out, and he's in the rain. It's this desperation, this feeling of helplessness, of being pulled back. It's, every time I watch this film, there's like 3 or 4 scenes, man, that really just get to me, that really just make me emotional. And it's one that I'm not a fan of melodrama. I'm not a fan of big exaggeration, and the film skirts by all that. The scenes of emotion in this are, man, they just hit me like a gut punch. Even thinking about them now, I'm almost like getting welled up, It's just such a powerful film. And man, the performance by James Franco, having to do so much physical acting, so much facial acting, is just such a powerhouse of a film. I mean, as I'm talking about it here, as I'm looking, I mean, Danny Boyle is a filmmaker who has always done really interesting stuff, and I think even now, although I don't think all of his films hit, it was a couple duds for me. This was one that, it's funny, it's pretty much right in the middle of his career, because it comes out of the gate with Shallow Grave in '94, and then of course his newest film at the time of this writing, or at the time of this recording, I should say, is 28 years later, 2025. So it's just funny. It seems like it kind of falls right there in the middle. It'd be very easy for a lesser filmmaker to, I guess, make something very melodramatic and very Hollywood of it, and have these really big orchestral, the score is bombastic, and he's constantly having to talk to himself, and there is a little bit of that, but in the film it feels so earned, because there's a reason for him to be doing that. And there are moments when nothing is being said, and we are flashing back, or we are in a fever dream, and of course I got to mention, when we get to the ultimate climax, at that point it feels so earned. It feels like the kettle is boiling so much in this film, that when we finally, even before that, when we get to a moment of violence, it almost feels like a stress relief. It almost feels like you took a Tylenol for a headache, because you're just like, all right, you're mellowing out. And then when we get to that, it is grisly, and it's violent, and it's just so emotional. That's the thing too, is that we as the audience, we're really being put through this situation and not holding back. Even the sound effects in that scene, there's one kind of I don't even know what kind of sound effect it is, but it's almost like if you blared the bass up on something, and it's like a screeching noise, and it's horrific. And we just see through the direction, through the sound design, just the agony that is going through, and it is a powerful, powerful scene. I'm not ranking any of these films, but I think this is definitely would be in a top like 10 if I had to, of the century so far. I really think this is a just total masterpiece. It's incredibly emotional. I think it is incredibly somber and incredibly hopeful and reflective. Danny Boyle has continued to be such a powerful filmmaker, such a great filmmaker, so many different kinds of films. And I think that's one of the things when I was talking about 28 years later, is that when Danny Boyle is directing, what would be to anybody else a traditional kind of zombie film, but then you have this third act, which is my favorite stuff in the film, when you have this interaction between the character Spud and then Ray Fiennes' character. and it's just so emotional and it's just so hard hitting. And if, the last time that I watched it, I really got kind of choked up at the end. I thought, well, maybe not the very end, but during that sequence, it is just so incredible. So 127 hours is even just talking about it now, it makes me want to rewatch it. And every time I've seen it, I think it just gets more and more powerful. Surprisingly enough, more and more powerful every time I see it, because you know the outcome, you know certain things are going to happen, but still, just going through this journey and just going through this this fever dream of a film, in lesser hands could have been something very forgettable and very broad, but instead Danny Boyle just gave us something completely touching and beautiful, and I love this film. I have almost nothing negative to say about it. So that was wow, that was 20 minutes for one film, just about. So this will definitely be a lot of episodes we're gonna be doing for this, but let's talk about another film. I got some time left, and this one I don't have as much to say, so I think it'll be fitting that we have a couple minutes left. I'm going to be talking about Spike Jonze's film from 2002, Adaptation. Yeah, Adaptation. I have not seen this film in quite a while, but I've seen this film a couple of times, and I had an acquaintance of mine. Him and I were going through, before I think the Nicolas Cage kind of renaissance that seems to have happened since maybe Mandy, maybe Joe. Him and I had always been a big Nicolas Cage fan, and not in an ironic way. We always could see the range and the skill that he had as an actor, but when you start doing all these straight-to-video movies, and maybe people kind of start to question your acting ability, and then although I wasn't really, actually I can flat out say I was not a fan of Mandy, the fact that film clicked with so many people, and people, I think, saw Nicolas Cage, at least from a newer perspective, in that light, was just so great. And now, he's still doing a lot of the straight to video stuff, but he has done so much interesting stuff since. Even that, I'm not a superhero guy, but now he's doing that Spider-Man, the Spider Noir show, and that's great. But Adaptation, yeah, Spike Jonze is such a fascinating filmmaker. It's been going through the Jackass films in preparation for the new one, and it's just crazy that crazy in a positive way that he does these. He didn't direct, not Jeff Tremaine, but he was involved and does these completely ridiculous, completely silly films, but then he makes stuff like Being John Malkovich and Where the Wild Things Are, which could have easily made this list if Adaptation had not been on here. I recently rewatched Where the Wild Things Are, and I almost can't believe they let Spike Jonze make that. And I say that in a positive way. That is such a, when people talk about, they can't believe that a studio funded certain films in the 70s and 80s and how they're filmmaker driven films on a budget, that's what that felt like. That is a film that is in desperate need of a contemporary kind of reappraisal. But Adaptation, we have Nicolas Cage playing dual roles in this. He is playing Charlie Kaufman in this, because this is co-written by Charlie Kaufman and Suzanne Orlean. And he's a desperate screenwriter. One part of him, because he plays himself and his twin brother. He's a desperate screenwriter who is trying to put The Orchid Thief on screen. He can't do it. He's very self-conscious. There's a great opening scene where he's at dinner with Tilda Swinton, and he's sweating, and he just looks, he looks so bloated. He looks so he looks so nervous. We get these great kind of inner monologues with him, talking about, being self-conscious, being, wondering what Tilda Swinton is thinking. And we have his confident twin brother who is writing this ridiculous screenplay, which is some of the funniest stuff in the film, where he's talking about, oh God, well, I forgot what it was called, but he's writing this horror movie, and I don't want to say the whole scene, but there is just this scene where he's explaining the killer, and and him as his brother is explaining why that doesn't make any sense, but it's one of these things, almost like an Amadeus kind of situation in a way, where you have this someone who, unlike Amadeus, where you have Mozart, who is this genius, and Salieri, who is not quite on that level, but feels this jealousy, wants that fame, wants that attention. Charlie Kaufman he's not as liked, or is not as renowned as his brother. Meanwhile, we have this another story going on between Meryl Streep and Chris Cooper. And that stuff I don't think is as compelling as the Nicolas Cage part of it, but it all comes together by the end, where it all feels fitting. In a third act, that the first time I wasn't totally sure how to feel about, but now that I've seen it multiple times since, I think it all completely works to a very dark and comedic third act, especially where it goes to, and it all ties into the screenwriting as well, which normally for some films that when they're talking about, being meta or screenwriting, and but then they're making a comment on their own film, sometimes that can be done well, and sometimes that can be a bit obnoxious. I think, I think the first Scream is an example of doing it well, and then you get to the sequels and they keep trying to do it, and it feels kind of forced. And then you see films that they try to, negate that by being like, oh, well, we're aware of our flaws, so we're not, it's okay if we do them. It's almost kind of worse that you pointed it out, because that means, you're just showing us that you're well aware of what you're doing. But, I mean, for a Charlie Kaufman written film, because Charlie Kaufman also, I believe he wrote Being John Malkovich, if I am correct. And yes, I am correct. I always forget if it was who wrote it and who directed it. And when he's doing films with Spike Jonze, that tone is so perfectly balanced between the absurd, the dark, but then also very comedic. And even, it's funny because even when they're on their own, when Charlie and Spike are on their own, they seem to be far more somber films. Because you look at Spike Jonze, he does, Where the Wild Things Are. It's a very somber, very reflective, really touching film. And then, of course, he wins the Oscar for Her in 2013, which, funnily enough, my biggest problem with that film are some of the moments of comedy, which absolutely fall flat. I just don't think they work at all. But then there is that character stuff in that film is so good with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson and Amy Adams, and just some moments that are so touching. Of course, that was, anyway, I'm not going to go into the whole thing with, Sofia Coppola on that. But anyways, you look at like Charlie Kaufman, and then what, he does, he writes Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And I should say he also directed Eternal Sunshine of the... No, I'm sorry, he didn't direct Eternal... I'm sorry, that's my bad. That was, oh my gosh. It was Michelle... Someone's probably screaming at me right now. It's Science of Sleep, Be Kind, Rewind. It was Michel Gondry. Oh my gosh. Anyways, but that feels like, okay, it's a little darker, even though you got Michel Gondry in that. But then, the films he actually directs are much more somber. He does Synecdoche, New York, which is a film that I've been really wanting to revisit because I've seen it once and I didn't connect with it, and it's a film that I think is intentionally difficult to fully get with. I don't know how I don't know how much you're supposed to take literal and how much not. I don't know if maybe any of it's supposed to be literal. It's an enigma of a film. And he did Anomalisa in 2015, which I was indifferent on. I don't have, I think it's okay. But he did I'm Thinking of Ending Things in 2020. And that film I actually did like quite a bit. And then his newest short, How to Shoot a Ghost, I haven't watched yet. But I know it's on the Criterion Channel. But I'm kind of going off topic here. Well, not even necessarily off topic, but I have strayed from the topic of adaptation. But when you have such a talented screenwriter and such a talented director that are able to skirt past what would normally be a meta cliche obvious poking at at the film world, at screenwriting, at this relationship between these two brothers that is also very heartfelt. I know that I believe Nicolas Cage, he was up for the Oscar that year, and he may have lost to, was it Denzel in Training Day that he lost it? I don't remember. I know he was up for an Academy Award with this. Would have been his second after his terrific performance in Leaving Las Vegas. But time is running out here, and that's okay. But yeah, a half hour, and we got to 2 films, only 18 more to go. But going forward, there is going to be a lot of rambling on this. Like I said before, I'm not writing down notes for any of these. I think it's better to be spur of the moment, to not overthink it, because these are my initial sort of feelings. So when I think about these films, these are the feelings that come to mind. When I think of 127 hours, I think of the emotion that it gives me. And when I think of adaptation, I think of, just these isolated moments, these comedic moments that really have me thinking about them after. So yeah, that's two films for this episode. The next episode may not be a continuation. That may come at another time. But for the time being, I guess you could call this part one if you really wanted to. And maybe when it's all over, I'll put them all together in one big episode. So if you're like, I don't want to listen to you spend so long on these, well, then you can listen to them all in one beat. But that will do it for this episode. Time is running out. Be safe. Be cool. The cat's looking at me like he's going to meow, so I'm going to cut this off before he meows. So take care, you guys, and all the best. And now this cat is scratching me, so now he really wants me to be over. Okay, I'm all done.